And they are definitely using Azure for a reason, like Pixar, Boeing, Samsung, EasyJet, Xerox, BMW, 3M. They are major multinational, multi-billion companies. They rely, run, operate their IT in Azure. And this CEO has a thought that his IT person is still not very convinced unless and until he shows him a visual of how easy things are in Azure. So he goes on and explains about a practical application of Azure, which is what exactly I'm going to show you as well. All right, a quick project on building an Azure app using or building a .NET application in Azure Web App and making it connect to an SQL database will solidify all the knowledge that we have gained so far. So this is what we're going to do. I have an Azure account open, as you see, logged in, and everything is fresh here. Let me go to resource group. There's nothing in there. It's kind of fresh. All right, I'm logged in, and this is what we're going to do. So we're going to create an application like this, which is nothing but an to-do application, a to-do list application, which is going to run from the web app, get information from us, and save it in the database that's connected to it. So you can already see it's a two-tier application, web and DB. All right. So let me go back to my Azure account. The first thing is to create an resource group. Let's give it a meaningful name. Let's call it Azure Simplilearn. All right. And it's going to be a free trial. And the location, pick one that's nearest to you or wherever you want to launch your application. Now for this use case, I'm going to pick Central US and create. It's going to take a while to get created. There you go. It's created. It's called Azure Simplilearn. Now what do we need? We need an web app and a separate SQL database. Let's first get our web app running. So go to App Services and then click on Add. It's not the web app plus SQL that we want. We want web app alone for this example. So let's create an web app. Give it a quick name. Let's call it Azure Simplilearn. The subscription is free trial. And I'm going to use my existing resource group, a resource group that we created some time back. It's going to run out of Windows, and we're going to publish the code. All set, we can create it. All right, while this is running, let me create my database. All right, SQL database, create a database. Give it a name. Let's call it Azure Simplilearn DB. Put it in our existing resource group that we created. It's going to be a blank database, all right? And it's going to require some settings like the name of the server and the admin login, the password that goes along, and in which location this is going to be created. The server name is going to be Azure Simplilearn DB. That's the server name. And the admin login can be, what can be the admin login name? Let's see. So let's call it Simplilearn. That's my admin login name. And let me pick a password. Click on create. So what have we done so far? We have created an web app and we have created a database in the resource group that we have created. So if I go to resource group, it's going to take some time before things show up. So if I go to my resource group, I only have one resource group as of now, Azure Simplilearn, and there I have a bunch of resources being created. It's still being created. Right. In the meantime, I have my application right here that's running out of or that's in Visual Studio as of now. Right. So once the infrastructure is set and ready in the Azure console, we're going to go back to Visual Studio, feed these inputs in the Visual Studio, so the code knows what the database is, the credentials to log into the database, stuff like that. So we're going to feed those information in Visual Studio. By that, we're actually feeding it into the application, and then we're going to run it from there. Deploying these applications takes quite a while. We really got to be patient. Right, now we have all the resources that we need for the application to run. Here's my database, and here is my app service. There's one more thing we need to do. that is create an firewall exception rule. So one more thing needed is to create an firewall exception rule, right? So the application is going to run from my local desktop and it's going to connect to the database, right? So let's add an exception rule by simply adding the client IP. It's going to pick my IP, the IP of the laptop I'm using as of now, and it's going to create an exception to access the database. So that's done. Now we can go back to our Visual Studio. I already have a couple of apps running or a couple of configurations pushed from Visual Studio. I'm going to clean that up. If you're doing it for the first time, you may not need to do this. Alright, so let's start from the scratch. This is very similar to how you would be doing in your environment. Alright, so we're going to select an existing Azure app service. Now before that, I have logged in. As you can see, I have logged in with my credentials. So it's going to pull few things automatically from my Azure account. So in this case, I'm going to use an existing Azure app. So select existing and then click on publish. Alright, if you recall, these are the very same resources that we created a while back. Right, we have clicked on save and it's running, kind of validating the code, and it's going to come up with an URL. Now initially the URL is not going to work because we haven't mapped the application to the database. So that would be the next thing. Alright, so the app has been published and it's running from my web app as of now. It's going to throw an error. Like you see, it's throwing an error. That's because we haven't mapped the app and the DB together. So let's do that. Alright, let's do that. So let's go to Server Explorer. This is where we're going to see our databases that we have created. Now let's quickly verify that. Go back to the resource group, right? Appropriate resource group, which is right here. And here I have my database, Azure Simplilearn database. Right, it has some issues connecting to my database. Give me a quick moment. Let's fix it. Alright, so we'll have to map the database into this application. Alright, so let's go to the Solution Explorer, click on Publish, and a page like this gets shown, and from here we can go to Configure. Here is our web app, alright, with all its credentials. Let's validate the connection, number one. Alright, and then click on Next. this is my DB connection string, right, which the app is going to use to connect to my DB. Now, if you recall, our DB was Azure Simplilearn DB, and that's not being shown here. So let's fix that. Right, so let's fix that. Click on configure, and here let's put our DB servers URL. Now before that, let's change this to SQL Server. All right, and then in here put the DB's URL. So go back to Azure. Here is my DB or server's name. Put that here. Right, the username to connect to the server, that's right here. Put that in, and the password to connect to the server, let's put that in. Alright, it's trying to connect to our Azure portal or the Azure infrastructure, and here is my database. If you recall, it's Azure SLDB, that's the name of the database. Let's test the connection. Connection is good. Click on OK. So now it's showing up correctly, Azure Simplilearn DB. That's the name of the database that we created. Now it's configured. All right, let's modify the data connections. Right, let's map it to the appropriate database again. All right, so our name of the database is Azure Simplilearn DB, and then it's going to be SQL Server. That's the data source. The username is Simplilearn, and the password is what we have given in the beginning. All right, let's validate the connection. It's good. Click OK. Now we're all set and ready to publish our application again. Now the application knows how to connect to the database. We have educated it with the correct connection strings, the DNS name, the username, and the password for the application to connect to the database. So Visual Studio is building this project, and once it is up and running, we'll be prompted with an URL to connect, and anytime we put or we give inputs to the URL, that's going to receive the input and save it in the database. Alright, so here is my to-do list app, and I can start creating to-do list for myself. Alright, so I have the items already listed. I can create an entry, and these entries get stored in the database. I can create another entry, take the dog for a walk. That's gonna get stored. I can create another entry, book tickets for a scientific exhibition, and that's going to receive and put that in the database. And that concludes our session. So through this session we saw how I can use Azure services to create a web app and connect that to the DB instance, and how those two services which are decoupled by default, which are separate by default, how I can use the connection strings to make connection between the app server and the database and be able to create an working app.